Today we are moving away from those German supercars. Instead, we are diving straight into a legendary JDM icon, the 1989 Nissan Silvia S13. This build is going to be an S1 class tune optimized for dry roads and street racing. But enough talking, let's jump right into the upgrades. First up is something I rarely do, but it just made too much sense for this build. I swapped the 1.8 liter engine for the 2.0 liter block from the Silvia S14. Since it doesn't change the exhaust note, I was completely fine with it. Plus, getting the engine from its direct successor feels like a perfect match. To hit that S1 class performance, a widebody kit was absolutely essential to widen the track. And let's be honest, it looks absolutely killer too. Since the front aero is now fully adjustable, I also went for a rear wing, even though it looks a bit like a foreign object on this car. The big country laps wing was just way too massive, so I chose a slightly more subtle option. To wrap up the visuals, I also threw on the origin lap street hood. Next, let's talk wheels and tires. The most important addition here is the set of semi-slicks. Just like in my last video, I explained the exact reasoning behind my part selection in a bit. Naturally, maxing out the front and rear tire width was a must. The rims, on the other hand, are pure personal preference. They are lightweight, which is great for performance, and I think they complement the car perfectly. I also stepped up the wheel size from 15 to 18 inches purely for aesthetics. Honestly, I didn't notice any difference in handling between the sizes, and since those 18s look absolutely finger-licking good, it was an easy choice. In the drivetrain department, I went all out. A race clutch, race transmission, and an adjustable differential to optimize shift timings and tuning, along with a race driveline solely for weight reduction. Moving on to handling. I installed race brakes for the extra adjustability and incredible stopping power. The setup pairs beautifully with the semi-slicks. Trust me, combining low weight and massive brakes with subpar tires is just a recipe for locking up at heavy braking zones. Race springs, dampers and anti-roll bars were a complete no-brainer for this build as well. On the flip side, installing a full roll cage and going for maximum race weight reduction isn't very common for a street-style build like this, but I'll explain why I've decided to go in later on. Last but not least, the engine upgrades. I won't break down every single part because most of them are self-explanatory. However, the reason I opted for a turbo upgrade rather than increasing displacement and upgrading the pistons is because I wanted to keep that authentic JDM street club sport vibe. Going the other route would have made the power delivery too linear and a bit too perfect. Personally, I think a bit of turbo lag gives the car a lot more character and charm. And there we have it, the first major milestone for our S1 build is complete. Now let's dive straight into the custom tuning menu. First, let's talk tire pressure. Finding the sweet spot for the specific tune was incredibly tough. It needed to work well on those high-speed tracks like the Legend Island circuit, with its long flat-out sections and sweeping corners, but also perform on the slower tracks like the Hokubu circuit, which demands precise braking and agility. Next up is the gearing. This is pretty straightforward. First gear is stretched out just enough that when you shift into second, you're right in the power band without spinning your wheels mid-race. Since both gears are so long, and because you rarely need more, I tuned the setup as a 5-speed. If I had forced a 6th gear into the power band, you'd find yourself shifting constantly, and the overall rhythm of the shift points would just feel completely off. The alignment setup is a total departure from what I've used on the Porsche Carrera GT. I dialed in significantly more front camber to keep that front end stable and to ensure the car turns in properly during high-speed cornering. The only real downside is that the outer tire temperatures won't be optimal on slower tracks. I also went with a massive toe in for extra stability. Trust me, this setup absolutely needs it, otherwise hairpins would just be a total drift fest. I originally wanted low front caster, but that would have required even more front camber, which would make things worse. The anti-roll bars are dialed in to maximize stability. Looking at the values, you'd think the car would understeer, but it definitely doesn't. For the suspension, the springs are on the softer side. Because the car is so light, stiffer springs would cause it to bounce around and unsettle the chassis. The ride height is actually pretty neutral, even if its lighter suggests otherwise. The dampers, however, are quite stiff, especially considering the car's weight is just over a ton. I tried a lot of different setups to get softer dampening to work, but I just couldn't make it click. Still, it feels great as it is now. In fact, with these settings, the notorious expansion joint on the Legend Island circuit bridge feels completely non-existent. As for aerodynamics, the front aero is just aggressive enough to let you throw in the car into fast corners without worrying about snap oversteer or instability. The rear wing is set up just enough to perfectly balance out the front. You still need to get a feel for it, though, because it can occasionally make the car feel like it wants to understeer. The brake balance is set up to make the car turn into corners like an absolute beast. But let me warn you, be careful with it. Trail braking too aggressively into a corner will cause the car to spin out in a heartbeat, but it perfectly matches that aggressive nature of the whole build. Finally, the differential is set up a bit on the conservative side. I didn't want to lock it down any further because it's already insanely challenging to control the car on corner exit. Any more lock and the car would instantly break traction and drift out of every single slow corner. And that is the complete tune. Now you're going to see the car flying around both Legend Island and Hokubu circuit, while I share a few final thoughts on this build. The main reasons for running semi-slicks on this car is the synergy between the aero upgrades, the low weight and the overall chassis stiffness, which allows for incredible cornering speeds. Another major factor is the extremely short wheelbase. It makes the car very twitchy, which naturally drives up the tire temperatures. Using a full race roll cage in this performance index range is definitely unusual. However, I did about 15 test laps on both tracks using a lighter cage and more horsepower instead, and it was honestly a complete nightmare to drive. Swapping out those engine parts to sacrifice power and adding a full race roll cage made an unbelievable difference. If I remember correctly, my fastest lap times were about 7 to 8 tenths quicker with the cage and less horsepower. Everything else should pretty much speak for itself. But if you have any questions about the build, don't hesitate to drop them in the comments below. That's going to wrap it up for today. If you've enjoyed the video, please smash that like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope to see you on the next one, and until then, keep the revs up high and the weight down low.